Good Saturday morning from London. This morning I want to talk about something called mortal sin. Now, it doesn't sound very exciting or very hopeful as a title for a blog or something, but bear with me. So, basically, what is mortal sin? Well, mortal sin basically is doing something so bad that basically, unless you seek God's forgiveness, you're totally cut off from God. So it's a bit like when you're doing your driving test, and if you make one big fault, you're out. It's a bit like having a heart attack, and I suppose the main artery blows, and unless you get emergency care, basically you're going to die. So basically, mortal sin has to be something very, very, very bad, like killing somebody, for example. Now, for it to be a mortal sin, there has to be three things. It has to be very bad, such as killing someone or whatever. You have to have full conscious of what you're doing, okay? So you have to know it's bad along with doing it. And second of all, or third of all, sorry, you have to have free will. In other words, if I put a gun to your head and say, I'm going to kill you unless you kill him, and then say, for example, you kill that person, well, that's not a mortal sin for you because you were put under this terrible pressure that I was going to kill you if you didn't do it. So you see, for it to be a mortal sin, you have to have full knowledge, full consent, and you have to go and do it. And you see, many sins we can say are grave sins. We can say they're serious sins. But as I said, to be a mortal sin, you have to have full knowledge, which we might have, full consent. Now, full consent we often don't have. And what I mean by that is often we have vices. And the main area in the Catholic Church that I hear people talking about mortal sin is in the area of sexuality. And people say things like, masturbation is a mortal sin, having sex before marriage is a mortal sin, this is a mortal sin, that is a mortal sin. Now, I'm not disputing the fact that these things aren't sins, but are they mortal sins? And the reason I ask that question is many people, and especially many young people, are caught up in these activities. They haven't received any real great prayer life or Christian input in their early childhoods. Many people get caught into the ways of the world, which are very promiscuous anyway, and people get caught into this way of life. And afterwards, just like an alcoholic or just like somebody who is recovering or stopping drinking, it's very, very difficult and it's very easy to have a pint, to have a drink. Yet that recovering addict, we wouldn't condemn them and say, mortal sin, you're going to go to hell. We'd say, no, 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 no. God knows the circumstances you've come from. God knows the struggle you're having. God knows that you didn't get the ideal childhood and the ideal start like maybe somebody down the road. So relax. It's not a mortal sin for you. And see, the Catechism also teaches this. The Catechism teaches us that the circumstances around an act don't make the act itself either good or bad. In other words, the circumstances don't change the morality of the act, but they do change and can change the responsibility. In other words, manslaughter or murder. Premeditated murder is when obviously you plan something and you go and kill somebody, and for that you'll get a very long prison sentence. But manslaughter is when it's not premeditated, something happens and on the spot you kill somebody or you do something in a fit of rage. And even though you'll still end up in prison, the sentence will be a lot less. And so you see the circumstances around an area basically depend or change, if you like, how grave that sin is. And you see, Jesus is a God of mercy. He understands every single thing about our souls. He understands our childhood. He knows our background. He knows the weaknesses of our souls. He knows the state of the church at the moment and at times the lack of help and the lack of support. He knows our fears. He knows our anxieties. He knows our inner issues. He knows absolutely everything. And often Jesus is there saying, don't be too hard on yourself. I'm not saying it's not a sin, but don't be condemning yourself. Mortal sin, mortal sin, mortal sin. Trust more in my mercy. And I especially speak about this in the area of Christian people and Catholic people struggling in the area of sexual purity. Calling everything a mortal sin is not going to help you. Telling a 15-year-old boy or an 18-year-old that masturbation is a mortal sin is not going to help them. Telling them that God is merciful and to do their best and to turn to Him, that will help. And so you see, it's the same. We need the same thing to do with addicts, the same thing with the gay community, the same thing in so many different communities. And some people will say, of course, that what I'm saying is what they call moral relativism. In other words, it's kind of saying, oh, sin doesn't matter, and it's just making light of it all. And that would be a danger as well. But I'm not saying that these things aren't sinful and they're not bad per se, but I'm saying that they're not the end of the world, and we have to turn to God's mercy, which is even greater. Otherwise, people get discouraged and their prayer life turns into a life of anxiety, a life of depression, a life of fear, a life of social isolation, and basically they don't have the fruits of the Holy Spirit. And many times when I'm in church, that's what I see. I see a group of people who are gathered around in what I might call a holy huddle, and they're afraid of their shadow. They're afraid to go here, they're afraid to go there, they're afraid of committing a sin. Now, Jesus doesn't want us afraid of committing a sin to that extent. Because if we're afraid of committing a sin, well, guess what we're going to do? Nothing. But then we're committing the sin of omission. And so today my message is very simple. If you're a Catholic and you're prayerful and you think you're in mortal sin, well, guess what? You're probably not. The majority of people in mortal sin don't even know they're in mortal sin. If you think you're in mortal sin, well, the very fact that you're thinking about it and love God really and truly suggests that you're not. And so Jesus is saying, don't be too hard on yourself. Trust in his mercy. Keep on going. He understands your weaknesses. Keep on going to sacraments. Keep on, of course, seeking his forgiveness. But keep on trusting. And to the world out there, of course, that thinks there are no sins, that's the big issue. And we need to be a witness of love and of joy and of freedom and of happiness and trust in God's mercy to them. And we can't be full of joy ourselves if we're weighed down thinking that if we take a step wrong or a foot wrong, Jesus is going to fire us into hell again. So let us get rid of this attitude of this Jesus that's just waiting to shoot us down if we commit a mortal sin. And let us allow the freedom of the Holy Spirit, the freedom of his mercy to reign in our hearts, reign in our minds, so that we may become the true apostles of love, of joy, of hope, of laughter, of the supernatural healing that Jesus wants for the entire world, and that by our example and by our lives, other people may come to know Jesus. So have a fantastic day. Pray, pray, pray. And afterwards, like St. Augustine's, or I think it was St. Augustine, he said, pray and then love and do what you want. So yes, today, love Jesus and do what you want.